Okay, I'd like to start by thanking Kun Premrudi Daurong for reaching out and inviting me for this important dialogue. My presentation covers three aspects. I will speak generally about the exceptional relationship of Tonle Sap and my country, Cambodia, as a source of livelihood. Next, I will touch upon the impact of dam on mainstream of the Mekong. And finally, I offer my suggestion on how we could safeguard the Mekong from sliding down toward the point of no return for the sake of future generation of those inhabitants living on this mighty river bounty. So as a way to introduce my presentation, I want to simply mention that the topic of this dialogue is most appropriate for those of us who are concerned with the future of the Mekong and Tonle Sap lakes, as we begin to see, or we have seen already in the past, negative effects of hydroelectric dam that have taken heavy toll on the environment and human. Particularly, we all wondering whether the Great Mekong and Tonle Sap continue to be the source of that provide food and livelihood, or is it these rivers will be infested with hydroelectric dam, compromising the nature given wealth of these magnificent rivers, which have given mankind the abundance of fish, rich natural biodiversity, and the renewed fertilize for agriculture productions over thousands of years already. So, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, the mighty Mekong has long been regarded as a foundation of economic growth and prosperity in mainland Southeast Asia. It is known to be the most productive freshwater fish in the world, providing constant supply of fish and other resources in the river system. The Mekong provides food, drinking water, irrigation, transport, and energy to well over 60 million people in China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam who live and earn their income on its basins. Cambodia have a unique relationship with Tonle Sap. So unique is the reverse cycle that the swollen Mekong River forced one of its major tributary, the Tonle Sap River, to flow in the reverse mode from June to September. I think this is well known. This rare and natural spectacle take place right in front of the Royal Palace of Phnom Penh. Those of you who visit Phnom Penh and enjoy the very scenic view of the four-arm Mekong spreading one on the Tonle Sap River toward the lake, from where Tonle Sap flow upstream for about 150 kilometers, forming a great lake near the ancient ruin of Angkor Wat. Those of you who travel on boat during rainy season before COVID, that is to say, can enjoy many wonderful scenery along this river. During this time, the flood water in Tonle Sap Lake then spread out, engulfing the surrounding rainforest. The water carried fertile sediment, and this condition is welcoming to a vast spawning and feeding habitat for hundreds of fish species. With abundance of fish, Tonle Sap Lake is known to be the source of one of the world's biggest inland fishery. The statistic in 1996 indicated the annual productions of freshwater capture fish to be between 300,000 to 4,000 tons. Of this amount, the catch in Tonle Sap account for 235 tons per year, which ranked Cambodia fourth among the top 10 in 1996. And I want to emphasize this 1996 statistic, and then I will say a few words about what is it now. The Tonle Sap, where the entire family play vital role in harvesting fish, is an astonishing, rich hydrological force for Cambodia rural citizens whose livelihood depend on the lake bounty. Cambodia Tonle Sap Lake is known to be one of the world's most diverse and productive ecosystems. The region have always been of central importance to Cambodia food supply. In addition, being the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia, Tonle Sap contains an exceptional large variety of interconnected eco-region with high degree of biodiversity, and is therefore considered as a biodiversity hotspot. Tonle Sap was designated a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve in 1997. Conditions of Tonle Sap today is no longer the same as before. According to the situation report entitled Hydrological Condition in the Low Mekong River Basin in January to July 2020, the Mekong River Commission reported that the river flow into Tonle Sap Lake are lower than they were in 2019 and considerably lower than those in 2018. So in the past 2 years, the water receded dramatically. The low flow could have severe impact on Cambodia due to the loss of fishery and irrigation potential. I could not imagine in the nightmare scenario that what will happen to Tonle Sap Lake if and when the flood pulse in the Mekong subsides so much that the Tonle Sap stopped reversing its flow during the monsoon. In this scenario, can Cambodia survive without fish in Tonle Sap? I'm hoping that those of you who are attending this dialogue can also help me answer these questions. From reading through the chapter entitled Tonle Sap in Brian Eiler's latest book, Last Day of the Mighty Mekong, one could not help but to have a shivering impressions about the fate of Tonle Sap Lake. The author was able to bring to the fore the sobering feeling of the local community and the grassroots people on the ground as they tell their simple but powerful story, contradicting to the traditionally known Cambodian saying, "Mien tak mien trai," where there is water, there's fish, referring to the disturbing decline of fish catch these days, affecting local inhabitants whose livelihood depend on their catch from Tonle Sap Lake. And this is the point when I wanted to, why I choose to tell the statistic in 1996. If you talk to fishermen these days anywhere who fishing on Tonle Sap, they will tell you that they have a hard time catching fish these days. According to Dr. Max Tirret, a well-known Cambodian scholar specialized in water governance and currently assuming a position as a research and policy coordinator at Oxfam, Cambodia noted that there has been overall decrease in Mekong water level in both January and February this year, 2021. And at the end of May this year, May 2021, which is a couple months ago, there was another major drop in water level was noted. This phenomenon caused the reverse flow of Tonle Sap to sharply reduce to a total volume of reserve flow in 2020 wet season, only 18.89 billion cubic meter, as opposed to the long-term annual volume of 43 billion cubic meter, a drastic drop of almost 2/3. There has been a corrective measure mentioned or recommended by the MRC, and I like to just go over a few of them. Those who are interested in solution to Tonle Sap, they including mitigating option for reserve flow in Tonle Sap with viable management option, operational management option for drought and flood mitigations, including technical viability, water diplomacy, and institutional consideration, transparent and timely notifications of water release and exchange of data and information sharing among MRC country and dialogue partner also were mentioned. And the MRC further recommend that CLVT, Cambodian, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand should consider requesting China to provide water supplement into the mainstream under the low flow condition or similar situation, while the MRC supply timely information on the crisis. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and dear participants, I am now happy to talk or to say a few words about the unresolved debate on the future prospects of the Mekong River in relation to hydropower dam on the Mekong. For several millenniums, the hydrological condition of the Mekong River has maintained its natural function in tune with the climate and landscape of the river basin. However, in the past 3 decades, the development of man-made hydropower dam and on the mainstream and its tributary has begun to alter the balance rhythm of the river, causing the transformation of the river natural flow system, which can lead to dreadful consequences for the inhabitant living along this basin. Even those major environmental concerns and controversy associated with dam building on mainstream of the Mekong River has been loud, clear, and well documented. China and other low Mekong Basin countries have been determined to construct huge hydropower dams. The impulse is often based on the imperative to produce more electric power in order to drive national growth and to raise the standard of living with cheaper and more plentiful energy resources. However, the utility of hydroelectric dam has been confronted on a number of grounds. First, they are expensive, very expensive. A dam proposed on the Mekong River in Sayaburi, for example, in Lao PDR, costs $3.8 billion. This is no small amount, considering to Lao PDR GNP stood at around only $6 million. Second, previously built dam on the China-Langkong River have been reported to adversely affect climate conditions, soil fertility, and water and fish resource. And third, these dam construction have forced people to relocate and alter local community life critically. There are plenty scholarly report and research project to go around exposing the alarming impact of the hydropower development that caused unprecedented environmental and social problems and impose severe ecological deteriorations of the Mekong River. Downstream countries, with the exceptions of Myanmar, perhaps have to bear huge burden, and they must mobilize large amount of their development fund and other resources to mitigate the adverse effects and to wrestle largely, in my opinion, unsuccessful effort to protect themselves against upstream dam and to try to restore the damage to their agriculture, fishery, forest, and way of life. Now, constructions of dam for the purpose of hydropower station can help one country achieve its economic prosperity, but it can also cause the region to feel insecure as frictions between and among states along the Mekong River could break out, deriving from competition for water resources. From the perspective of regional peace and stability, dam is also considered quite controversial that could implicate regional stability. There are scholars who link state security to the transboundary river governance issues and argue that dam on the international rivers such as the Mekong could induce insecurity among states downstream particularly, and that cooperation between riparian states is a key to addressing these insecurity. Scientists and scholars have warned us that dam could kill the Mekong River. Sorry to use this word so bluntly, but why more dams are built in the river? Here are my observations and the reason why. There are policymakers in the region who overlook the big picture about the mainstream dam and their consequences. dam can cause the mighty Mekong River to dry up, affecting severely the livelihood of the local community, which draw their life support from the Mekong, and curbing down the rich and abundant biodiversity of this magnificent river in an alarming rate. More often, regional policymakers, economists, hydropower company are totally consumed with the desire to promote infrastructure development, energy supply, and they speak very highly about GDP, GNP, growth, and not aware or reluctant in some cases to address the warning sign that have been reported by scientists and scholars about the critical and threatening signal that are getting clearer and clearer these days on the Mekong River. They often overlook upon the responsibility for the social and environmental impact that would have huge economic costs to recover the erosion, the loss of precious natural resource that the mighty Mekong has to offer for future generations. The energy demand is relatively high in CLMV and Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, making it hard for government to stop building hydro dams. According to International Energy Agency, Southeast Asia Energy Outlook for 2017 reported that Southeast Asia collectively overall energy demand is expected to rise as much as 60% by 2040. So we're not yet there, 20 more years ahead of us. So this region need more energy. They demand energy to be produced. The report highlights that hydro was the biggest contributor from a renewable source of power generation. They all look into hydroelectricity dam as a way to meet up this demand. Aside from that, all government of the upper low Mekong and the low Mekong basin know that the Mekong is an important source of energy to feed their economic development. International River a river protection organization say that the low Mekong basin has a hydro potential of 30,000 megawatt, while the upper Mekong, mostly located in China, have a hydropower potential of 28,930 megawatt. These are statistics that is available online. I wanted to add one more reason as to why more dams are built. The Mekong Committee River, established in 1995, for the explicit purpose of promoting cooperation and sustainable use of the river water, have failed to enforce its review protocol or to resolve dispute. The Lao government, for instance, decision to move toward with Sayaburi and then Dong Hong are proof to no meaningful prior to consultations has taken place, and the downstream country contend that the review process remain incomplete. So what can we do? What can we stop them being built on the Mekong? Here are some of my views. Would be to convince policymakers and dam developer to rely less on badly constructed dam in consideration of the genuine concern of scientists and environmentalists who warn that unchecked dam on the Mekong would amount to imposing bad future for the vibrant community that making their living on and around the Mekong and destroy the lively biodiversity of this majestic river. Second, as a community of like-minded people who want to preserve and protect the Mekong River and Tonle Sap, we must continue to expose the big picture about mainstream dam and their consequences. We must speak louder that ill-constructed dam can cause the mighty Mekong to dry up, affecting severely livelihood and the local community which draw their life support from the Mekong and Tonle Sap, and curbing down the rich and abundant fishery biodiversity of this magnificent river very gravely. Third, effort should be made to ensure that dam building, if one is really needed, is based on sound assessment in meeting environmental and socio-economic criteria laid out by the World Commissions of Dam, and heeded the recommendation made by the Strategic Environmental Assessment of Hydropower on the Mekong Mainstream, commissioned by the also years and years ago. But I think these documents are still relevant, and people keep it in the shelf and never visit that document when they want to build more dam. Fourth, although the energy demand is relatively high in Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Thailand, making it hard for the government to stop building dam. But many experts believe solar and wind power often offer increasingly viable alternative, and that more dam on the Mekong in particular will be more catastrophic. And there has been a welcoming sign that solar generated electricity does have potential in enhancing the energy consumption in the country as a significant step toward the lower carbon electricity grid. Solar is considered as a new renewable energy that allow Cambodia to opt away from the controversial hydropower that could adversely affect the Mekong River and reduce Cambodia's dependency on fossil fuel generated power, which is known to be harmful and environmentally destructive, and that which can increase air pollution and carbon emission affecting climate change. Recently, the Cambodian government, take note of the development of solar energy. From being a skeptical in 2016, Cambodia now plans to generate 20% of its power from solar within the next few years. So these are good signs. Now, my fifth point is that government of the 4 Mekong member countries, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand, must see to it that the mission of the Mekong River Commissions can be achieved ultimately. Although the MRC has been relatively successful at generating knowledge and developing a set of useful rules and guidelines to guide the reasonable and equitable use of Mekong River system, but not have much success in finding common ground on consensus or important decision, notably hydropower. The effectiveness of the MRC could be at risk of being irrelevant, and unless member states reinforce their political will to ensure that the implementations of the 1995 Mekong Agreement and the function conferred on the MRC by member states are upheld properly and free from real politics, the fate of the Mekong River will be miserable and disastrous. Finally, the Mekong, the LMC, people know about this Lam Chang Mekong Cooperation China-led mechanism. Being a newcomer, should engage in a mutual and transparent collaboration with all existing initiatives such as the Mekong River Commission, Greater Mekong Sub-Region, Japan-Mekong Cooperation, the Mekong-US Partnership, just to name a few, for the search of an effective measure to mitigate the negative impact of dam and bring about greater prosperity to the region. This way, MRC can look forward to playing a more active and positive role in water resource management and cooperation in the region, making other power more receptive to China's growing role in regional affairs. Now, I like to conclude my remark by saying that by simply say that we must do all we can to stop harming the mighty Mekong River and the great Tonle Sap Lake, and try to find the best solution to safeguard these nature-given wonder for future generations. In my opinion, the best way to achieve this goal is to stop altogether building hydro dam on the mainstream and to explore in earnest other alternative sources of energy that are eco-friendlier and less harmful toward humankind and affecting the environment and the livelihood that the river and the lake have to offer. I thank you very much for your attention and listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Excellency Sothirak. Wonderful broad overview also that you mentioned about the geopolitics and the fact that the Mekong is, is a shared river system, very unique, mighty river, shared river system, many countries, China, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia. To our next speaker, Kun Montira, Unakul from UNESCO, talking about, sharing of borders and talking about the Mekong River being part of this sort of a more geopolitical conversation. UNESCO has written a report on sort of looking at the potential impact of hydropower development on UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is something perhaps at Kun Montira, maybe you can start off by telling us more about this particular issue. And of course, I understand that you yourself have other interests or other areas you want to talk about in terms of the Mekong River, but please, thank you.
Thank you very much to Kun Panu and to the organizers for having us join this dialogue discussion this morning. Thank you very much to His Excellency Pou Sothirak for giving us a really kind of all-encompassing overview of the geopolitical, but also environmental and other considerations vis-a-vis the larger picture of hydropower projects and the Mekong and the various effects that we already are seeing. I'd like to focus today on the context of Lao PDR, and particularly Luang Prabang, a World Heritage Site, which has been in the news recently with regards to a proposed hydropower project that is now underway. And so by way of background, before we get into the issue of Luang Prabang, I'd like to start by looking at the kind of the pretext for why we're all here today together, which is the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy and the collective impacts from the various floods that took place in Laos in 2018. Not long after the events occurred, the government of Laos, in cooperation with the World Bank and the United Nations, undertook what is known as the post-disaster needs assessment exercise in order to determine losses and damages throughout all social and economic sectors in Laos as a result of this series of incidents, which all happened back to back, including the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy Dam break. And so it is not that common in these types of disaster needs assessment exercises to include the dimension of culture, but this was one of the places where, in fact, it was included. In that sense, demonstrating some commitment and concern on behalf of the government of Laos and various development partners as to the cultural dimensions as part of the country's overall kind of socio-economic development. So this table shows you both the inclusion of culture as well as the inclusion of tourism as two sectors that were assessed in terms of damage and losses, and then a number of recommendations were put forth vis-a-vis recovery as well as reconstruction. And as you can see from the numbers, the contribution, well, the damage and losses incurred to the culture sector as well as to tourism were not inconsequential. And they, in fact, formed a significant part of the damages that were sustained by Lao PDR. And if you compare it, say, with the electricity sector, they were comparable as well. So when we looked into damage and losses for culture and tourism, of course, there are losses foregone in terms of income foregone from tourism and so forth. But what was really clear, and this is sort of a consistent thread that we see not only from Laos, but many other countries that have sustained disasters as well, is the critical role of culture in all of this. Some of the impacts are difficult to measure, and they don't come out very well in terms of dollar amounts. but nonetheless, they have a really a huge psychological as well as social toll on the communities that are affected by these incidents. So whether it's the damage and destruction of significant places like temples and other kind of communal spaces, but also the implications for what happens when communities are torn apart, relocated to temporary housing that ends up being not so very temporary, social bonds, and even socio-physical patterns of how they live together are disrupted. These all have a lasting impact well beyond the short-term recovery from the incident, and in many cases may linger for years to come. And so these very real impacts that we saw from the assessment, which included culture, really sort of, it should be a wake-up call in considering the cultural dimensions of impacts that are occurring from potential issues like dam breaks and other types of disaster scenarios that are associated with hydropower in a worst case scenario, but also in a kind of a normal scenario as well, because there are a range of social, environmental, cultural impacts that would happen even if dams operate not in a dam break or emergency scenario. And so on the docket this year at the World Heritage Committee meeting is the issue of Luang Prabang, and various dimensions of the safeguarding of Luang Prabang are being considered, including urbanization, issues of tourism, but last but not least, certainly the issues associated with the new proposed hydropower project, the Luang Prabang hydropower project, which is 25 kilometers north of the site. But in fact, we know that there are also effects from the other project, which is downstream of the site, which is the Sayaburi project. So the World Heritage Committee meeting is in fact ongoing right now. It's hosted by China this year. And in fact, yesterday, the big news was that there was a World Heritage Site that was delisted, which is removed from the World Heritage Site. And this is a historic occasion because there have been very few of these incidents in the past. The site that was delisted was Liverpool, which is a maritime city, due to a number of new constructions that have been occurring near the waterfront, which have been deemed detrimental to the World Heritage Site, that nonetheless have not been able to be stopped and are proceeding. And so Liverpool now joins a very short list of other World Heritage Sites that have been delisted. One is the Oryx Sanctuary, another is another riverside site in Dresden, in Germany. And so what do these three delisted World Heritage Sites have to tell us? And what kind of warnings do they hold? The reason that they were delisted is the fact that their World Heritage values, or what is known as outstanding universal values, are deemed to have been irreparably damaged. And so the very reason for which they have become World Heritage Sites no longer holds, and therefore they merit being delisted. So when we come to Luang Prabang and we look at the World Heritage Site of Luang Prabang, which many people are familiar with, what is the potential that a project such as the Luang Prabang hydropower project could have on the outstanding universal value of Luang Prabang? What impacts could occur that could in fact compromise the very reason for which Luang Prabang has become a World Heritage Site? So Luang Prabang is recognized as a World Heritage Site on the basis of its hybrid culture between Lao culture and European culture, as demonstrated in its buildings, you know, the sort of series of magnificent temples that we see, but also in terms of its townscape, as well as its setting. And in this case, we can see that, you know, not only the temples, but also domestic architecture, the way that the town has been laid out as an agglomeration of villages, overlaid with a French town planning scheme. But very importantly, also the this natural setting of Luang Prabang, which sits at the confluence of the Mekong River as well as the Nam Khan River amidst this backdrop of mountains. And this riverine setting is very much part of the lifeblood of the World Heritage Town in the various types of annual and daily interactions that Luang Prabang residents have with the river, from boat races to gathering of seaweed, kaipan, and other types of ceremonial beliefs, including understandings of the Naga resident in the Mekong River as well. So in a sense, the Mekong is very much part of the living culture of Luang Prabang. And from a legal point of view, the Mekong River is also part of the World Heritage Site as well. So contrary to popular understanding that maybe Luang Prabang is, World Heritage Site is focused on the town as such, when we look at the map, we actually see that the environmental and natural setting of Luang Prabang is part and parcel of the World Heritage Site. And so there's a stretch of the Mekong River. And this stretch of the river is exactly where the townspeople of Luang Prabang have various, ceremonial and other types of social activities, as well as livelihood activities. And then on the other side of the river, on the Jompet side, is actually part of the mountain on that side, and the way it adjoins the river is also included as well. So you'll see that not only in the boundary of the World Heritage Site, which you see in purple, but also the larger protection area for Luang Prabang, which is the area in red that you see here, that in fact encompasses an even larger natural setting and an even longer stretch of the Mekong River. This is part of the Luang Prabang World Heritage Site, larger protection status as well. And so bearing this legal protection status and bearing kind of the significance, as we noted earlier, in terms of its various values, what could be the impacts of the proposed Luang Prabang hydropower project? So we know this project is outside of the World Heritage Site. We know that the project is outside of the buffer zone of the Luang Prabang World Heritage Site. But nonetheless, this doesn't preclude the fact that there are a series of impacts that are possible even though a project is outside of a World Heritage Site. And in fact, the various reports and impact assessments that have been done as part of the MRC's PNPCA process have already pinpointed a number of concerns. And this is concluded in the technical review report, whose cover I placed here. So among other things, the technical review report mentions that in the event of a dam break, which we know from Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy is not impossible, or in the event of severe flood operations, the report notes that there is the potential inundation of Luang Prabang city, and you will see on the map on the left-hand side that in fact the entire World Heritage Site would be engulfed in floodwater. At the same time, of course, associated with this is the issue of loss of lives, as well as other types of social, cultural, and environmental impacts that would happen as a result of this possible dam break or maximum flood scenario. In addition to this, of course, there's loss of lives in terms of ethnic groups, as well as other populations who are living in the town or in the immediate vicinity of the town. There's damage to various important places, including stupas, temples, and so forth. There is potential navigational impacts, and then there's maybe impacts from labor influx during the construction of the dam itself. And these are all things that we know have been known to happen with other dams as well. Notwithstanding the potential impacts from the Luang Prabang Dam by itself, there's also the consideration of what about the combined impacts between the Luang Prabang Dam and other dams, the cascade of dams which are on the Nam Khan River, on the Nam U River, or from the Sayaburi Dam, which is actually some 100 kilometers downstream. But we know, and we have seen already, backwater effects from the Sayaburi Dam that affect all the way up to Luang Prabang, including, for instance, the inundation of areas which of the riverbed, which normally in the dry season, which coincides with the Lao New Year, would be normally used for various ceremonial practices. That is no longer possible because of the elevated level of the river, which causes that area to be constantly inundated. And in fact, this is not a surprise. It was already pointed out in the EIA of the Sayaburi Dam that was conducted in 2010, 10 years ago. But it was not an issue that was flagged or made it to the attention of the international community in terms of impacts to the Luang Prabang World Heritage Site. So what is next? Well, what is the next step? So the World Heritage Convention, which is the international treaty which Laos, Thailand, and over 200 other countries have signed, calls for the conduct of impact assessments, and particularly heritage impact assessments in this kind of scenario. And it is through these heritage impact assessments that we would be able to determine what is the scope of the impacts that would happen from a project such as the Luang Prabang hydropower project, and what are possible mitigation measures, including the full range of mitigation measures, which is not to conduct the project, all the way to minor measures that would be required. And in this case, of course, the issue of emergency response planning would be quite important. And so we can see that this is a requirement for all types of development activities that have the potential to impact the World Heritage Site and have the potential to impact specifically on the outstanding universal value of heritage sites. And so UNESCO, along with our advisory bodies, have developed guidelines for this. And in fact, the Heritage Impact Assessment is now underway for the Luang Prabang project. And what we hope to get out of this Heritage Impact Assessment is that there could be solutions that could be found which would lessen the impacts on the World Heritage Site. The image you see on screen here is from Galle, which is a fortified World Heritage Site in the south of Sri Lanka. A proposed project off the coast of Galle was proposed as such, which would have significant impacts, both visual as well as in terms of water currents and other impacts on the World Heritage Site. So through a heritage impact assessment process and a consultation and negotiation process, another alternative was finally come up with, which moved the proposed project to a further away location, and as a result, lessening the negative impacts on Galle. And so this could be one of the scenarios that could result, which would allow for heritage conservation to be addressed along with larger sustainable development goals, as well as the overall management system to be improved as well. So that's sort of the larger context for this. And if we look around the world, in fact, Luang Prabang is not an isolated case in terms of being asked to do a heritage impact assessment. There are a large number of World Heritage Sites that have been requested or are currently having heritage impacts underway. I mean, the good news in Laos is that, first of all, the environmental impact assessment regulations in Laos already include some initial considerations for culture and for heritage within the heritage impact assessment laws. That said, it could definitely be strengthened. From the heritage side, the heritage law of Lao PDR is currently under revision in order to include a new clause and requirement for heritage impact assessment as well. So once that goes ahead, that would mean that ideally, both under the EIA laws as well as under the heritage laws, there would be provisions that jointly call for heritage impact assessments to be carried out. So that's the good news. The worries that we face now is that beyond the Luang Prabang hydropower project, there are in fact, as you know, a series of dams proposed along the Mekong, and one of the other ones in the south of Laos, the Lat Sea Dam, is in fact not very far from another World Heritage Site, which is the Wat Phu Champasak Cultural Landscape World Heritage Site. This one is only 10 kilometers north of the Wat Phu World Heritage Site. And this is still in very early days, but it was already included as an issue in the strategic environmental assessment that was conducted at the behest of the MRC a number of years ago. So the planning horizon for this, has been going on for some time, and so we recognize that this is likely to be an issue, and therefore, this is something that has been discussed with the Lao authorities in order to draw lessons both from Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy as well as from the current situation unfolding at Luang Prabang, in order to, be able to take a more proactive stance in anticipating and dealing with the issues that could affect this and potentially other sites around Laos as well. And so now coming back to Luang Prabang, what is the status of Luang Prabang vis-a-vis the dam and vis-a-vis the World Heritage System at the moment? First, maybe I'll just sort of give you an overview that World Heritage Sites that are in concern face a sequence of activities when it comes to the official monitoring and consideration process by the World Heritage Committee. And so the World Heritage Committee, which is a committee composed of member states that have signed the World Heritage Convention, and in fact, Thailand is one of these committee members, as well as China, Russia, Norway, Australia, and so forth, as we speak. There is a sequence of actions that are taken when a site has been flagged as having a possible conservation issue. So there's state of conservation monitoring, where the World Heritage Committee formally recognizes that there are issues at the site and then enters into a dialogue with the country in order to closely monitor the situation and then come up with various proposals in order to address those issues. The second step is when the World Heritage Committee decides to send an official reactive monitoring mission to the site to assess the site. The third step is when, either because of ascertained danger or because of potential danger, the site is then listed on the World Heritage List in danger. And then if through a series of negotiations that are clearly not leading to any kind of positive or improved outcome, and it turns out that the site is really on the brink or has lost its outstanding universal value, and at that point, the site becomes eligible to be delisted from the World Heritage Site. But as I mentioned at the opening, only 3 sites so far, including one yesterday, have ever been delisted. So it is a process to get to that point. And the intention of the World Heritage Committee is not to shame and name our member states, for failure to fully safeguard the World Heritage Site. But the intention of the committee is to work with member states in order to avoid that this, red flag situation occurs, and to provide technical support or with the, support or with the cooperation from other member states to provide financial support and other means in order to essentially address the situation, solve this problem in a kind of mutually agreeable manner as possible, to ensure that the World Heritage Site can be preserved. And so where is Luang Prabang now? Luang Prabang, as of this World Heritage Committee meeting that is ongoing, the state of conservation of Luang Prabang will be tabled to the committee for consideration, and a number of decisions will be taken by the World Heritage Committee regarding Luang Prabang, including the hydropower project. Among the draft decision items regarding Luang Prabang is to send a reactive monitoring mission to Luang Prabang to investigate the site in order to come up with a more nuanced understanding of what is going on. And so these are the first steps of monitoring. And then should this advance to the next steps, we could get to a situation like Tanzania in the Selous Game Reserve, where in fact there is a hydropower project in the middle of the game reserve, which is quite controversial. That has triggered the Selous Game Reserve World Heritage Site to be listed on the World Heritage List in danger, along with other issues such as poaching. So that's the orange flag stage. And then of course, if we get to the very end stage, delisting, this would mean that the site would be removed from the World Heritage List if its outstanding universal values were considered threatened to that stage. And so I show you here a timeline for one of the sites that was delisted, which is Dresden in Germany, the Elbe River Valley, which is a beautiful cultural landscape. This site was delisted as construction was only in the very initial stages, in fact. And so it wasn't like they had finished building the bridge and then it was delisted. But what is notable is that it took a number of years, over 3 years of negotiation and consultation and trying to find alternative outcomes, and then failing to find those alternative outcomes, which led to Dresden being delisted. And so this sort of gives us a sense of what the next steps are ahead of us in the World Heritage process. And so today I've shared with you some thoughts about Luang Prabang, its status as a World Heritage Site, some of the concerns that have been raised by UNESCO, the World Heritage Committee, and the international community vis-a-vis the Luang Prabang hydropower project, and concerns about this hydropower project in the larger context of Lao PDR and in the larger context of the Mekong River system. And so I'm very glad to take questions and look forward to our ongoing dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Captain Montira. It was a wonderful presentation about many issues concerning the World Heritage Site. I mean, it's quite remarkable, and then all those examples from elsewhere really give us a glimpse of what's gonna, what can unfold in Laos. To our next speaker, Captain Bruce Shoemaker, who's joining us from a very late hours in the United States. Bruce, of course, is an independent researcher, is well known for his work on Laos, and he has spent time in Laos and have written about hydropower issues and other issues concerning Laos as well. Of course, Bruce also have this unique, again, experience in the United States about the Klamath dams in Oregon. So I think there's a few things here which he can share with us, his experience in Laos, but also this, the largest dam removal in the US history issue with the Klamath as well. So Bruce Cup, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and looking at the screen to see a lot of old friends listening in. I wish I could see you all in person instead of from the other side of the world. So yeah, I was gonna just summarize a little of my work in Laos and kind of where I see hydropower in Laos right now. And then maybe talk about something that could be a little more inspiring, which is the situation that, where I find myself now in far northern California and Oregon. So I am in a, let's see, let me get this up here. Anyway, I'm going to first talk a little bit about kind of how we got here with hydropower. And as you might know, a lot of the history of hydropower came from about 100 years ago or more, where dam building really started in the United States and Europe, some other developed countries. And we were, you see some of this now, I think, in places like Laos, where the developing hydropower was seen as a big symbol of national development, a patriotic, nationalistic activity. And, this is actually from a record album from a famous folk singer, Woody Guthrie, who in the 1930s sang about hydropower dams, kind of to inspire Americans to support it and think of it as a patriotic, important activity for national development. So, during the Cold War period, the US and other Western countries, somewhat through the World Bank and other multilateral groups, began promoting large hydropower to developing countries. And actually, I don't know if everybody knows this, but in the 1970s, it was the US Agency for International Development that first did studies of the mainstream Mekong dams and was moving towards studying them and possibly supporting dams on the mainstream of the Mekong, and did some early plans and design work for them. And then the World Bank also supported the first large hydropower project in Laos, Nam Ngum, and but then all those plans sort of got delayed or stopped by the the changes of government in 1975 in Laos and the region. So, as hydropower began to be promoted and went to developing countries, we started to see a lot of the problems with it around resettlement, livelihoods, human rights violations, and so we started to have protests emerge against hydropower in the 80s. This shot's from India, but as those of you in Thailand know, that also in the 80s and 90s became a big feature in Thailand with opposition to Bak Moon and other projects. So after that series, and the World Commission on Dams, which criticized hydropower extensively, the World Bank wanted to stay in the game with hydropower, and they promoted Nam Ton 2, which was approved in 2005 as a new model of hydropower in Laos that would have positive social and environmental benefits. And so they did a big public relations campaign on having their first big new model of hydropower be in Laos. And it's interesting because they chose a country to do their new model where people did not actually have a right to say no to it, but yet it had a lot of rhetoric about public participation and consultation, and that this would be a great new model. I, together with actually 17 researchers, did this book 3 years ago. We published about Nam Ton 2, where we talked about a lot of the failings of the project on both economic and social and environmental grounds. I'm not going to go into all that tonight, but even as the World Bank was promoting Nam Ton 2 as this new model, we saw that it actually had a lot of negative effects. So what happened was that both the World Bank's Nam Ton 2 project and then also the Asian Development Bank's Tun Hin Bun project, which was completed in 1998, were portrayed as these successful models of hydropower that that basically set up the systems for investment in Laos and set the whole framework for private hydropower investment. And they used the rhetoric of sustainable hydropower and talking about how, in addition to having national economic development, these hydropower projects would be positive. There was a lot of rhetoric about local community benefits, and so all of a sudden, we saw the number of proposed and under development projects in Laos really explode in the early 2000s and up until the present time, both including on the mainstream of the Mekong. So we've also seen how a lot of even Western donors continue to support this idea of sustainable hydropower. And even though a lot of the financing at this point is from is not from Western countries. It's from China, Korea, Vietnam, other places. But basically, we saw a lot of donors for a long time be very supportive of this development strategy in Laos, and I would say not pay nearly enough attention to some of the negatives, which were basically that these large projects are being supported in a country where the people just do not have the right to say no. You know, there's no right to say no. You can't complain or say no to these projects. We also have seen a lot of poorly implemented resettlement and not enough attention to what happens to people's fishery-based livelihoods. And then we also a lack of capacity in the country for proper regulation or oversight. And I think we can, I think Premrudi will talk about Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy, but that's certainly what we saw happen there 3 years ago. So when I'm looking at this from the perspective of villagers and what has happened to village communities that have been near the sites of these hydropower projects, and one right from the point when environmental impact statements are done and the first environmental assessments are done, there's a lack of recognition of traditional livelihood systems. The fact that most people are dependent on fishing, they use the wetlands, they use the forests that are all often lost with these projects. And so a lot of my early work was looking at downstream impacts, the fact that not all the impacts of a hydropower project are right in the reservoir area where people have to be resettled, but it's also about their livelihoods, especially the fisheries, the migratory fish issues. But we've also seen what resettlement assistance does occur focuses on infrastructure, like things that are, can be contracted and built, like schools and roads and houses. And, that's where a lot of the money is, and officials are able to make, be involved in these construction companies and make money on it. But there's very little recognition of restoring livelihoods that people had when they get displaced by these projects. And we've both seen that in this emergency that's occurred with Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy, and also with just the other ongoing projects that you have very, very little concern about compensating for fisheries or livelihood losses. So there'll often be some nice houses built, maybe kind of nice, but there's very little compensation or any type of mitigation for the loss of people's fisheries and livelihood losses. And as anybody who's familiar with Laos knows, if villagers complain, they can get in trouble. Two colleagues of mine just recently wrote a paper that I think I would point to as a good summary of what is going on with hydropower in Laos, and they express a lot of the same frustrations I've had with trying to do things, because it just doesn't seem like, however many capacity building projects, institutional strengthening, donors love to put money into these projects, like for training, study tours for government officials, but none of it actually seems to be working because certain people are making too much money on it. And so it's extremely difficult to see how to stop this this very fast rush to hydropower and these ill-conceived projects without some real fundamental reforms in how decisions are made in the country. And I think donors could do a lot more than they have. I'm very glad, Kun Montira, to hear that UNESCO is trying to do what it can. A lot of the other donors need to do more to try to put some pressure on, because scientists, researchers are not listened to, and local people are not listened to right now in Laos. So it's a very difficult situation to see how to get better decision making among, within the Lao government. I went to my first meeting on Nam Tuntu in 1991, if you can believe that, a long time ago. And so I've been following this for a long time, and it's very difficult to see a positive outcome right now of what can happen. Anyway, I do want to talk a little bit about something that could be a positive inspiration, I hope, for the future, is that at the same time that hydropower is being developed very rapidly in the Mekong region, we're seeing in other countries that there's a really big reconsideration of the costs and legacies of these projects, and in both in the United States and in Europe now, we've seen hundreds and thousands of small weirs and dams removed, basically when they've outlived their usefulness, and they have been part of really a growing movement to look at the importance of rivers. And a lot of it has to do with fish. And in the United States, it has to do with a species called salmon, which is a very popular healthy food for people. And it's also been the basis of livelihoods for many indigenous communities for many, historically. And so what happened was in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, all these dams were built in the United States and in Europe with no consideration, just very similar to what's happening in Laos or the Mekong region. They just did not really study or really care about the impacts on native communities. And so there has been, when I moved back from Southeast Asia and moved back to the States, I found myself very coincidentally in this region of far northern California and southern Oregon, where the Klamath River runs. And this was one of the most important salmon producing rivers in the Western United States. And in starting in the 1920s and up to the 1960s, there was four dams built on the mainstream of the Klamath River, and it had a huge negative impact on salmon fishery, together with agricultural diversions this was a very important source of culture and livelihoods for the the indigenous tribes that lived in this area. There's four major tribes that all depended on the Klamath River. And for many decades, nobody cared or paid any attention to it at all. And then in more recent years, there's been a movement to get rid of to remove these dams, and it was led by the indigenous communities. And so this is a cascade of 4 dams all on the Klamath River, and it somewhat reminds me of, if you go to northern Laos, there's the U River, a tributary of the Mekong in Luang Prabang province, where we've recently seen the construction of a series of dams on the U River, seven dams actually in total, and that's having a devastating impact on the fishery and people's livelihoods on the U River. And so it was very interesting to me to see a place where there was a cascade of dams. This is another lower down one, which is the earthen fill dam called Iron Gate. So there's 4 large dams here, and there's been a campaign that took more than 20 years, led by the indigenous tribes, to ask for these dams to be removed. And we've now are on the track to success. They're not out yet, but there is a plan for them to all be removed. Starting in about 18 months, a year and a half, will be the actual physical removal of these 4 large dams. And it's it's sort of an amazing story how this happened. And it relates to a number of factors that are present in the United States right now. One is that it was the tribes, the indigenous people themselves, that led the campaign as they became more empowered and aware of how to try to influence policy. It was the indigenous groups themselves who led this campaign. But this happened also as part of a wider cultural change in the United States, where the plight of Native Americans, indigenous people, became more widely recognized. There's sort of a cultural shift where there's just more concern about social justice and human rights for indigenous communities. So they were able to use that sort of change in the culture to promote the idea of this as a social justice issue, that their communities depended on salmon for their livelihood and their culture, and the only way to get that back was to remove these dams and let the fish run in the river again. So, but this was not an easy thing. It's been a campaign for more than 20 years at this point, and it was a very interesting campaign. The 4 dams are owned by a private company, a power company, and so the campaign focused on both government officials, but also on the company itself. And every year they would have people from the tribes went to the stockholder meeting. They're owned by the company's owned by a American billionaire, Warren Buffett, and so they would go to the annual shareholder meeting and have a big protest demonstration outside. Now, these are the things you can do in some countries, but obviously this wouldn't work in Laos right now. But another big aspect of it was coalition building. They got environmental groups to join the fishing industry off the Pacific coast, which was dependent on salmon and had been impacted by the loss of the fishery. And also some of the farmers who were actually because these dams weren't used for irrigation, they're just used for power production. So they were able to convince some of the agricultural community that they'd be better off and have more water for themselves if the dams were free and fish could survive. Another technique that was used was environmental regulation, and California had over decades and they'd increased their standards for water quality, and these dams were creating a lot of bad water with algae and water that was too warm for fish to survive in once it got released. Anyway, I'm just kind of starting this research. This is the Klamath, the mouth of the Klamath River. And what I'm interested in looking at is just how dam removal, just the fact that dam removal is starting to be is happening. This is going to be the biggest dam removal, we think, in the world, for 4 large hydropower dams. But it's not going to be the only one. There's already plans to take out some ones that will be even larger than this on another river in maybe 3 or 4 years. So I've been trying to look at how this could be inspiring for people in the Mekong. I think for decision makers, it's important to know that this whole hydropower industry is being reconsidered now, because so many of the bad effects were just ignored and not thought about when these dams were built. And now 30, 50, 80 years later, it's very clear what effect they've had on the environment and on people's livelihoods. So hopefully we're going to see some change, and that this will just be the start of a larger movement. So I'm going to end there, but can take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. That was very interesting, especially with the experience that the United States is going through. Now, we have a very limited time, and His Excellency Sothirak has to leave soon. So before I go to Kun Premridi, our last speaker for the panel, I would like to actually open the floor up immediately for people, for viewers. If you have any question, particularly addressing Excellency Sothirak on any of the issues that have been raised so far. So please, if you have any question, you can, I guess, raise your hand, and the organizer will allow you to speak, or you can also write in the chat function of your Zoom. I'm not sure what how else, but I mean, please, if you have any question now, or even other panelists, if you have question for His Excellency Sothirak, please do so now. I mean, I can start off, I guess, by asking you, sir, I mean, from your extensive experience in both the public sector and now out of it, you know, I mean, we're seeing that, you know, the political the decision makers in mainland Southeast Asia have been very heavily, you know, pro-dam. I mean, how do you see that changing? I mean, you know, it doesn't matter if the river has been very dry for the last 2 years. It seems that the policymakers still hell-bent in going ahead with dams rather than solar or other energy methods.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I wanted to also acknowledge and congratulate the two speakers before me for very insightful expose, one on cultural aspect, the other one on grassroots effort to try to stop dam. They all very relevant. Your questions about why is the decision maker are so difficult, so hard to get them to change their mind. This is not just for Cambodia. I think Southeast Asia, all over, including your country in Thailand, will be very difficult to alter the thinking of the policy maker. Now, let's honestly speaking, all policy maker or government official, they wish to do good for the country. When there is a need for dam building or something like that, they often think that this is a solution, the only solution to the shortage of energy demand. So that's why it's kind of like lock them into this mode without thinking that there are other alternatives. That's one point. Secondly, the whole, you know, our friend from Bruce mentioned about the fundamental way of working, particularly among decision makers. They have to also adhere to the so-called transparencies and so on. In between the decision maker is the investor, the guy who have a lot of money in their hand, and they make a lot of profit out of the hydro. And so a few envelope in the hand to hand out to make the project approved, no problem with them. And that's why this is what happened sometimes. Some decision maker fail to grapple with the other side of the coin, which is the consequences of bad dam. And that's why we're not. By the way, I was trained as I was a Boeing engineer. I'm an electrical engineer, so I can speak dam. I can speak electron and protons and so on. And I build the Boeing airplane. I don't build dam. When I was a minister, during my time, it was just fixing a lot of problem with the energy sector. Nothing to do with dam. I did not recommend any dam building. But in fact, what I'm trying to say is that for policy to make a sound judgment on it, they need to seek all advice. Particularly, they have to look at the cost and benefit. What is it? Is the benefit override the cost, or is it the cost override the benefit? And do it in the long term. Don't do it in a short term, 5 year, like next day or something. Look over this very carefully, and you will find out that dam building does not really give anything with, even if it's a good dam. I said this because I visit many dams myself, and then even with that, I don't think dam is the most efficient way of earning money or to improve a government GDP or anything like that. It's not the best way. So be careful with cost and benefit. The cost that you have to repair defects created by dam is like 10 times, maybe even more, if you allow this to happen. You know, even I just give you an example. A very developed country like Germany, they are now talking about eliminating the energy power station that run by nuclear. Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, now she's gone, but she definitely wanted to phase out this, you know. And you look at in Japan, Fukushima, Japan is at the forefront of everything technology wise. So why is it there's a meltdown? So even country like that cannot predict the technical fault, and dam break out, you know, dam badly built can break out. I don't know whether I have time to listen to my good friend Prem about Lao Dam. I want to hear what the people on the ground say. And these are my answer to you. So unless policymaker do a proper calculation, particularly cost and benefit, looking in long term, explore all the possibility before sign on to hydro. And that's my suggestion.
Excellency, we have one question for you from Mr. Sothirak. According to the MRC report in 2021, you can actually see it in the chat as well. According to the MRC report in 2021 on the dry season hydrological condition in the lower Mekong basin, the report says that hydropower dams, including Chinese dam, do not have an effect on the Tonle Sap. What would you respond to this statement from MRC? Why water level in the Tonle Sap lake is very low? This is the question.
I read this report myself. Let me be very honest with you. MRC is the operator. Who's the MRC shareholder? Do you know? Who control MRC? Is the full government, the member. They are liable to the government. MRC cannot enforce. MRC have done great work. Don't mistake from me. Have done really great work in terms of design guideline, management scheme, you know. But unfortunately, many of these recommendations are not implemented because everybody agree to disagree. You know, when a country want to build dam, they don't even take a guideline that was created by MRC to start with. So coming back to what the MRC said, that it's not because flow of water and so on, or the Chinese dam on upstream. What's absent in there is also MRC did not really say much about the cause of this low flow or not enough water was in part because of dam. Try to look. There's no word in there that say dam. It's because of dam. Only scientists, only expert, only researcher, only grassroots people, only people who's on the ground who see the dreadful effect say dam. Dam has caused this to happen. MRC very carefully not mention anything like that. I leave this to you. So, but the good thing about MRC is that it provides platform whereby a member country can consult one another, and they should consult more often. They should listen to MRC. I make a point that the shareholder should make MRC, the credibility of MRC will be as credible only if the shareholder make them to be one, more political aspects than anything else. I mean, the technical aspect they can manage very well, in my view.
Well, thank you, Excellency. I have not seen any other questions. So, there's one from Raymond Weiss. Since Laos is the main hydropower developers on the Mekong, what alternative way Laos could pursue to develop? I think I will leave that question for now, and I want to go to Kun Prem Reddy, so at least His Excellency Sothirak will have to hear a little bit from what she has to say in case we have more time at the end, and then we can move on to more questions on Laos and elsewhere. So without further ado, I want to bring in Kun Premrudi Dawrung from the Lao Dam Investment Monitor. Please tell us more about the situation about hydropower development in Laos and of course the impact it's having on the Mekong River. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Kun Panu. I'm actually as a last person, and also because the event is organized by Lao Dam Investment Monitor, I was not prepared to speak for long, actually, from the beginning. And I have to say thank you to our excellent speakers, our three friends who have speak very much in depth about the concern that they are having here. I'm very happy that today we can make this happen. What I plan to do here is I would like to just bring my maybe 3 blunt points that relate to what I'm seeing in relating to the Mekong hydropower dams, which is, of course, it's not only the mainstream dams, right? We have been observing or more or less working, monitoring on the hydropower dam in the region back to, say, more than 25 years ago. And I think my first point that I would like to mention is about our understanding, which I think Excellency Sothirak already mentioned a lot about this as well, about the conflict between the understanding of the people, so-called people in the region about the hydropower dams, and I might call the dam proponent, right? I think if we look around, maybe in the past decades until the last few years, especially after the incident of Xe Pian-Se Namnoy Dam, if you ask the journalists or the people who have been monitoring the situation, this is no questions anymore. That Mekong already been changed a lot, and especially in the past few years when the river changed from the muddy color to the clear deep blue color, I think the change of the Mekong and her important parts of her body, namely Tonle Sap and the delta of the Mekong, is very clear. And the incident of Xe Pian-Se Namnoy 3 years ago also brought a very much concern of the public about the risk of the dam, which I think became the issues that being mentioned on and on. Of course, in the current situation of Luang Prabang Dam as well, the risk of the dam break, which is also linked to the earthquake, have been mentioned. And also, I think the current situation seems like we are having the kind of more knowledge or understanding because we have the data that being provided or committed to provide by China. The United States have been supporting for a unit to monitor the situation of the hydrology in the Mekong mainstream, for example. But I think in my observation, I think this kind of knowledge, understanding that we are having, it's still not enough. I think until now, the debate on the dam that affected to the Mekong is tributary Tonle Sap and the delta, still mixing a lot with the debate of the climate change. I'm not saying that is 2 different things, but I mean, as His Excellency Sothirak mentioned, touched upon a few times, it became the issues that even the mechanism, the existing mechanism like MRC, cannot really say it out loud that is because of the dam. And I think very importantly, we do not have the big data, right, about the impact. If we are talking about dam as a commodity, especially a dam that being built in Laos, we don't have the numbers of how much we do loss economically, right? I mean, from Tonle Sap or from Cambodia, like Tonle Sap used to be the 12% contribute to GDP in Cambodia, I understand 12%. What happened to that 12%? And what about Delta, the world rice basket? How much we have been lost, right? So how can we call it sustainability if it really causing by dam? But I guess the point here is that when we are talking why this cannot be clear, because the information and the understand that we are having among us, the public or the people along the Mekong, is totally different from the issues or the information between the government, our own government, and the dam proponent. This is two different things, and it's never be reaching to each other in real. So I think under the circumstances, we seeing the pictures of the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy victim, you know, being suffered, trying to struggle to survive. I mean, you know, negotiate for the fair compensation and so on, but we seem to not enough have the linking. You know, we know that the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy Dam have been fixing very quickly. We hear very little from the company side. We already heard when they start operate after the 1 year delay after the dam collapse. So I think the gap here is very big. So it brings to my second point. I think what we are facing in terms of the situation, I think when we separate the issue of the Mekong Dam, of course, we are facing the China dams. And I don't think in China, the Chinese government and the company, which is mostly linked to the government, are changing their mind, you know, otherwise. And I think they push further for the more dams on the Mekong, upper Mekong mainstream. And I think the review of China in terms of the large dam is not here yet, even though yesterday we have heard, right, the very, you know, very much risk of the dam in Hainan that almost break. But I think, you know, we are still heard that China is planning to push the dam in the upper, you know, Brahmaputra river that link to India, for example, is even bigger than the Mekong mainstream dam. So the intention is there, is not going anywhere, right? And for the lower Mekong mainstream, of course, for Laos as the key actor to build hydropower dam, Laos still push further, even though after build 75 somehow dam in the country, and Laos now known that being very deep in debt. You know, I think maybe only in February this year that the electricity, the Laos asked at least 6 major company, Thai company, that invest in the power plant, you know, selling electricity to EDL to push further to allow EDL to pay, I mean, later, right? They cannot pay. And also ask the Thai company to reduce the benefit from investment in Laos as well. And the Thai company said, most of them said to the media that it's all right, we can help, we can do that. And I guess the reason is because the dam company is still having their own choice. The one who doesn't have choice is the people who have to, you know, bear the cost of this, right? And then after the EDL asked the company, right after that, the EDL Gen, which is, you know, the company, which is the EDL share, like 51% within EDL Gen, came to ask the Thai, you know, investor to put more money into the plan. And they have the whole list of the dam plan still. So, I mean, this kind of relationship, you know, between our government, you know, like EDL Gen, inside that, the Krung Thai Bank of Thailand and RAD Group is also a shareholder of the EDL Gen. So the matter between our own government, you know, the company, our own bank, you know, is something that very far from the understanding of the public. And I think this is to me, or to us who are monitoring the issue, is quite a big problem, you know. And I think the important thing is that among the investor for the hydropower dam, they're still seeing the future, right? If not from electricity is from the construction fee. You know, there are so many parts that they can get the benefit throughout the process of building them. But this information, this decision never reach to the people who have to suffer because of the project. So probably my last point here is that what I see we are going to face, I think we are facing the dam proponents that do not facing the, you know, the truth. You know, we are dealing with the Thai government who even we have the oversupply of the energy, you know, up to 60%, so on. The Thai government, our EGAT, you know, never say no for stopping to buy electricity from Laos. Insist that they would like to buy another 3,000 megawatt for the future to meet 9,000 megawatt that they promised Laos, for example, right? And Laos itself now associate very closely with China, you know, open up the new company to do the transmission line, for example, which means that, you know, when Thailand with overwhelming electricity, you know, reach to the, you know, roof when they can buy electricity, Laos would like to push further, trying to pay the debt by going further with the hydropower dam, selling to different countries, you know, further, you know, extend with the transmission line. So I guess with this scenario, we will see or we will hear more and more of the, you know, phrase that dam is clean, sustainable source of energy, which, I mean, this phrase going to bring us back to the very far part, you know. I mean, looking at what Bruce just told us, you know, when the country like the United States, who used to have a very successful history of hydropower dam, start to talk about the removal, you know, dam as a clean, sustainable, cannot be used. I mean, we cannot allow this to happen. None of the large-scale hydropower dam in the Mekong region can call sustainable, not only on the climate change aspect, but livelihood, natural resources cannot, you know, you cannot do the tick box and say people agree of that compensation tick, and that became sustainable dam already. So my final point here will be, we have no choice, you know, we cannot have the government and the company, the dam company and the bank, the business playing their role this way, right? I mean, for the dam that already finished, you know, people who have enough experience have to have enough space for the negotiation, right? They have to leave. And then for the dam that haven't happened yet, you know, I mean, looking at the Thai experience, the dam is not needed. We cannot use an argument that we need more electricity. It's not true, right? What we need, especially after the COVID-19, we would need the sustainability in real for the people who need to rely on the river and the resources, and only bring the people up there by all the relevant groups. I think it will be the answer, and this is not the sovereignty of each country, but this is the issue for all of us as a region, because Mekong is belong to the region and even for the world. I think I'll end here, and I think I can see the list of the people who are listening to us, and I think there might be some questions that people would like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Kapun Premredi. Very well. I know that His Excellency Sothirak doesn't have much time. He already raised a question, so I want to open the floor up for more of a discussion type. We don't have that much time left, but His Excellency, do you want to say the question yourself? I mean, the question is basically addressed to Bruce, you know, about the change in attitude in the United States. Does that translate to change of mentality in the development partners here, like USA or ADB, in regarding hydropower dams? Bruce?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that change happens kind of slowly, and we certainly have seen the U.S. government make some statements and be skeptical of the mainstream Mekong dams. I think a certain amount of that is geopolitics and kind of rivalry with China and concern about China having too much influence in the Mekong region, maybe more than it is a sincere worry about the environmental or social effects of the dams. The World Bank, they talked about the Nam Ton 2. They originally talked back in like 2013-14 that the great success of Nam Ton 2 was going to inspire, them to get back into large-scale dam building or financing, and that has actually not happened. Other than the IFC branch of the World Bank did try to support some what they called sustainable hydropower in Laos and Myanmar, but even that program, I believe, is shut down now. So they don't seem to be a big player. And the Asian Development Bank, I'm not sure what the latest is, but they're I wouldn't say I've seen a reconsideration. They're not publicly saying that they're turning against hydropower, but we're just not seeing as much financing of hydropower. And partly they got enough pressure to increase their standards, lending for on human rights and environmental sustainability, at the same time that a lot of other investors like Chinese banks and Thai banks did not insist on those same standards. So they've kind of become less competitive in that market.
Okay, Bruce, thanks. His Excellency Sothirak will have to go soon. So any final remarks, sir, that you want to make just before you leave? His Excellency, your...
Yes, thank you very much, Kun Panu, and thank you, Bruce, for clarifying this. Before I leave, I wanted to thank everyone, and I listened very carefully to Kun Premrudi. Appreciate her 3 points. Before I leave, I have a following say. For those of us who want to stop dam building, please don't stop your effort. Don't give up. Just continue to make noise. To whoever, company, government officials, anything, that you don't think that dam is serving the purpose. What purpose is that? Is to bring forth happiness, bring forth development, but right development that can trickle down to the people. Often enough, the poor doesn't really know when the state is improving the GDP because they still poor. It's very, very sad. This is what happened. So that's one message. Second, do not dramatize. Do not think that all government are bad. No, government are not bad. It's just that they're not exposed to the right. They lack sometime angle. They don't see other way of getting to meet their demand. So we need to expose them. Those of you who are at the front end of the latest technology in terms of solar, wind, another renewable technology that you know of, please write more and let the government know that these are alternative source of energy that the government can think of. And thirdly and lastly, please allow the people, the grassroots, to say when you build dam. Dam is not small project. It's a big project. Get the local to involve. And I appreciate the point that Kun Prabhupada speaking, that to protect them, maybe when the state should do a contract with the developer, provided that they have a very good engineer and they do environment and assessment properly and all these things, but also including the social protections, like she's trying to say, the breakout, and then even if dam is not collapsing yet, just put it there. So this is a guarantee that the people right and privilege are protected, because they're so small area unintentionally may cause them dramatically to wipe out their income or something like that. It will be dreadful for them. So it's good to represent their voice. So again, thank you so much, and I hope to engage with all of you again in the future. At CICP, we have a sort of like a sort of flagship publication called the Journal for Global Mekong Study. We are publishing it for 4 issues. We are now preparing the 5th issues. Please visit our website. We welcome any scientist, any advocate, any scholar who can shed more light as to how to do our best to safeguard the Mekong and the Tonle Sap. Thank you very much. I have to leave now.
Thank you, Excellency, and on behalf of the organizer, thank you for participating and sharing us your views. Thank you, Prab. I see on the chat panel that we have about 3-4 different questions. I'm going to actually read a couple of them out, and I'm going to open the floor to the remainder of the panelists to answer them. Some of them are addressed to you particularly. So the first one that I've read out before, the question from Raymond Weiss, since Laos is the main hydropower developer, what other alternative way Laos could pursue for development? I think 3 of you will probably have answers to that. The other one was put to this is from one of our Facebook page, actually. Which dam do you think has good practice in the world in terms of public participation of community and good for economic development too? So with that 2 questions, maybe we can, is there anyone you want to answer on these 2 things? Alternative to hydropower for Laos, and on the idea if there's any dam that have good practice in the world in terms of public participation. Who would like to go first?
Maybe I'll make a comment about the first question, which is alternatives. And I think the question, the larger implication of the question is not just what alternatives in the energy sector, but sort of what alternatives for Laos development as a whole. And this echoes what His Excellency Sothirak was saying in terms of, decision makers need to be exposed to a range of options in terms of driving growth. And I'm going to share quickly some of the research that has been compiled by Pou in terms of investment outlook in Laos. And if we look at sort of the breakdown of shares of the sectors in Laos economy, yes, it's true that electricity has a quite large role, 11.4%. This was in 2018, before COVID. But what we also notice from this is that, all these other economic sectors in Laos have a lot of potential to grow as well. So it is true that, the government has put a lot of eggs in the electricity basket, but and it's difficult for them to shift to other sectors. This conversation is exactly the same conversation that would concern, say, the tourism sector in Thailand, right? 20% of the GDP comes from tourism, but if you talk to policymakers about why don't we reduce our vulnerability and exposure to tourism as 20% of the GDP and look at other alternatives, should we be looking at tech industries? Should we be looking at design? Should we be looking at food and agricultural processing? These are not conversations that are had because sectors have a silo approach to trying to fix the problems of the sector. So fixing the problems of electricity production in Laos is not just about, well, what are more sustainable options for electricity production in Laos, but it's to address the larger aspirations of Laos as the battery of Asia, and then say, well, are we looking into other options like, I don't know, manufacturing of food products? Laos has another very big sector is its agricultural sector. Can we create value added for that sector? And that's something that's not such a huge stretch, because in terms of the skills that would be needed are, you would require some upskilling and reskilling, but it wouldn't be like pushing Laos to be doing things like fintech tomorrow, right? So I think these are sort of the larger macroeconomic considerations that need to be looked at in terms of what are the other options for Laos beyond electricity, and then as a subset of that, beyond hydro.
That's very interesting, Montira. I had one other comment about, I mean, I think in general, this is more of like a philosophical thing side, but I think we have to be very careful from outside the country saying what the alternative should be. You know, the big issue is that Lao people don't have a voice in their development right now. They don't get to make those decisions. It's just being made from the top down. And so I don't think it's really the responsibility of people on the outside to say a different development direction or alternatives, as much as it is that that we insist that Lao people have a voice in their own development. They have a right to determine the direction of development in their country. And, you know, maybe some villagers would decide that if there was a different type of contract where, you know, the villagers had a share of the benefit, maybe they would want a hydropower project, you know, somewhere, you know, I don't know. But right now, they don't have a voice in that decision. And so just suggesting, well, it should be solar power or some other sector. I think first we really have to think about the who makes those decisions. And right now it's not the majority of Lao people that are making those decisions.
Fair enough, Bruce. There's two questions, one direct to Kun Montira and the other direct to Bruce. Kun Montira, your one is a bit shorter. From Mark Sitirith, is it possible for that World Heritage Committee could propose to delay the construction of the Luang Prabang Dam? But before we go to you, I want to read the one to Bruce as well, so he gives him some time to think. Giving the lesson from World Bank investing in Namturn 2 that has generated negative impact on social environment and gender aspect of the watershed, the ADB is currently drafting energy policy gears towards investing to larger scale hydro as sustainable energy option. What is your comment to the ADB in their finalizing the draft energy policy, and what can the ADB learn from its past investment? Thanks. This is from Sochita Sim. So maybe Kun Montira, maybe a quick answer on the World Heritage issue, and then back to you, Bruce. We actually don't have that much time left, I think, but we can go a little bit over time, like Kun Premriti. So yeah, so please, thanks.
So the World Heritage Committee, in its draft decision regarding Luang Prabang, has restated the point that has already been made by the World Heritage Center, which is that construction activities on the Luang Prabang hydropower project should cease until the Heritage Impact Assessment Study is completed and mitigation measures and other types of findings from this study would be tabled and looked at.
Thank you. Kun Bruce, do you want to give comments on this ADB? I mean, you know that the National Development Agency, not just the ADB, have sort of been pushing for hydropower in this part of the world. So, I mean, what's your kind of general comment, I guess, on this?
Yeah, I haven't followed the specifics of this current draft energy policy, but I would say I think this idea that and Premriti mentioned this, but just the basic idea that large scale hydropower is a sustainable energy option, there's no track record for that. So I think it's actually irresponsible for the ADB to promote that as a sustainable energy option when we've just not seen it. We haven't seen it with their own projects in Laos. ADB was also involved in Namturn 2 and Tun Hin Boon as well, which you know, despite a lot of PR, actually had a lot of very serious negative impacts, unanticipated environmental and social impacts. So I think if they're still promoting large-scale hydro as sustainable, they actually haven't learned nearly enough from their past investments. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, is there any other, Kun Premriti, any views on sort of, you know, the idea of alternative or, you know, the previous questions on you know, is there any good practice from any of the hydropower development elsewhere in the world in terms of participation and others?
Not much actually. The questions for Laos, I mean, if we're starting from looking at the battery of Asia, being the battery of Asia as an ideology rather than the strategy for the economics, I think it will be very difficult to say anything. I mean, I think, you know, it's maybe do not talking back about the past, but I mean, for now, I think what I would really like to see as one of the you know, person or the people of the region is the, you know, carefully review of the economic benefit. Actually, I mean, please do not forget that Laos is a country with 7 million people. You know, I mean, looking at the large scale project in the country, not only hydropower dam, but also the mining and other large scale projects to compare, you know, if it's already make the Lao people with this population become better in life. I think the answer is in there, you know, and I think, of course, I would say that I would definitely believe that it's a choice of the Laos people, you know, to think about what will be the alternative for the development. And I would not start from setting up the hydropower dam there and try to talking about everything around the issue of the dam. Maybe it's not a good start. Thank you. Yeah.
Anyone else? I'm just seeing a comment, I guess more than a question, from Kuntanya Lee Roberts Davis. ADB International, regarding ADB, the National Rivers along with the NGO Forum on ADB and other allies are pushing forward to clearly raise pressure in relation to the ADB's current energy policy review, as it is correct. Large hydropower dams are specifically promoted as sustainable within the draft energy policy now being considered. Key demands are underscoring that large dams are not consistent with ADB's strategy 2030 and do not create climate resilience, do not help mitigate climate change, most especially that better options exist to meet energy needs, promote a just transition, and do not undermine the rights of communities that depend upon rivers, and do not destroy riparian ecosystems. Actually, Tanya, if you want to, you know, say something, you can also, I think she can raise your hand and unmute, right? I mean, this is more of a forum mode now. And as well as any other of our, you know, participants, if you have anything you want to say or raise question or bring to the discussion, you can do that as well. Anyone else have any more questions going? We're kind of a little over time now. Kun Premrudy, any final points you would like to raise? Or Kun Bruce, any final points yourself you want to raise? You know, I mean, the experience of the United States is it's very interesting, and it's an angle that I'm sure that myself and others will look into exploring with Southeast Asia. Is there any other places in the world that are kind of going back on dams and decommissioning dams that we should look into?
Definitely in Europe, dam decommissioning is becoming a big thing, and mostly smaller scale ones. But I think the point is that it will probably look very different in Thailand or in the Mekong region. You know, in a way, what happened with Bak Moon was a partial decommissioning, at least for a while, of a dam that had been in operation and then its operation was suspended. It doesn't always take a dam being completely destroyed to stop its. It depends on the type of dam. So dam removal and river restoration will probably eventually come, but I think it's I mean, even in the United States, it took a very long time, like with the Klamath, more than 20 years. So, but I think it's good to have some inspiration and hope for the future, and I hope to research some more about the possibilities, realistic possibilities in Thailand and Southeast Asia in the future.
Thanks, Bruce. I see another question from Kun Piriya. Is it? It is difficult to avoid trade-off when the dam comes. What could be a possible path to balance between policymaker and national economic versus regional sustainability. I guess that implies in terms of, if the dams are coming, what kind of, path can policymaker choose to balance between sustainability and economic development? I mean, it's the classic questions, I guess, when we're discussing hydropower. Any takers? I mean, it is kind of the main theme. Maybe even Bremrudi or someone. No.
Yeah, I think we have touched upon this a little bit before. I mean, before, right, in our answer. Yeah.
Well, I guess I mean, if there's no other questions, I mean, I have one thing that people, including His Excellency, was touched upon, but the geopolitical angle. I mean, going forward, right? And we have seen this increasingly over the past few years. This influence of China versus sort of the interests of the lower Mekong nations. I mean, how do you reconcile this going forward? With more investment, with more kind of business interest coming into Laos and elsewhere of pushing for more hydropower projects, not only in the Mekong mainstream, but also in the tributaries. I mean, how do we move on as a region? I mean, it seems that most of you agree on this idea that hydropower dam development needs to be rethink. But the reality is that, it's saying otherwise, it's saying that there's going to be more dams coming ahead. I mean, and with this geopolitical reality, with the greater influence of China, how is that going to play out, do you think? And how can, agencies like the MRC sort of remain, I guess, relevant if the Chinese, through their Lanchang, Mekong, want to do more in terms of, regulating or not regulating the use of the river?
I think we have seen quite a lot of, so-called movement, I mean, the process, not trying to discuss and trying to bring the, framework like the Mekong Lansang and into the, frame that MRC having, because we all know that China have been the observer within MRC for a long time, right? Even though they're not the members. So I think come back to the, the original point. I think it's been clear, right? I mean, the information that being, gathering the issue that being raised by MRC itself, right? I mean, back to 2010, that MRC with the strategic environmental assessment, talking about the impacts of the dam, it's obvious there, but I think it depends, right? I mean, I can say that if China playing more role, try to engage with the lower Mekong country, they're supposed to make, the process, more professional, more or less, I mean, rather than, even more secretive, or the push will be even more aggressive without having the people to participate in there. So I think with the platform that China itself having with the Lansang Mekong, I think it should allow the people to be there, the community or the voice, and it should be allowed the more public debate on the issues in overall.
I see that there's actually two more. I mean, let's say let's try to wrap this up in, say, 5 to 10 minutes, right? But I see two more. The admin just sent two more questions. Is the basic question for these two questions is what about the role of ASEAN? ASEAN strategic plan has this thing about acknowledging the cultural rights of all people of ASEAN to leverage on culture for inclusive and sustainable development, including the rights to opportunities to access to cultural properties. You see some opportunity that ASEAN can play some role in addressing the Luang Prabang issue? And the second question is, has US dam removal lesson been mentioned or as potential put in the US Mekong initiatives? So I guess Kun Montira, maybe you can answer the ASEAN question, and then Kun Bruce maybe on the US Mekong initiative. Kun Montira, maybe you first.
I mean, I think to echo what His Excellency Pou Sothirak was saying, I think as many channels can be used in order to get this message out there, whether it's through civil society channels, or it's through the media, or it's through even scientists and other specialists, as Bruce was saying, even though maybe their voice is not always heard, but also intergovernmental channels. So certainly the mechanisms of the World Heritage Committee and the World Heritage Convention, and through UNESCO and other UN agencies as well. There are other UN agencies working, for instance, on the issue not of looking just at hydropower per se, but looking at strengthen all the due diligence and sort of governance decision-making mechanisms for investment projects in Laos as a whole. I mean, so I think this is an issue that is being addressed through multiple channels. And so ASEAN is definitely another channel for that. ASEAN doesn't often have much of a interventionist role on these types of specific issues. But certainly Laos, when it hosted ASEAN Summit a number of years ago, culture was one of the things that was highlighted in that summit. And so let's not limit it just to ASEAN, but I think we should really be looking at all the different channels that are available.
Sure, and I just noticed that you just answered the US Mekong angle as well. Do you have any comment on that, or should we go to Bruce?
I defer to Bruce.
Yeah, I think it's starting to have some impact. 2 years ago, I was working with Brian Ehler, who many of you know from Stimson Center, to bring the Stimson Center had gotten funding to bring at least 2 groups of people from the Mekong region over to the US to look at water governance. And we were specifically in the process of arranging visits to the Klamath River and the Columbia River to look at these issues around hydropower and reconsidering hydropower. There was going to be, one group was going to be government officials and MRC officials, people like that, and the other was going to be more civil society. And it all got stopped just because of COVID, and we couldn't have travel. So I hope that can happen, but it might still be some time to plan that. But that was going to be some U.S. government money going, to try to share some lessons about what's happening in the United States about reconsidering hydropower, so I'm hopeful that will now start, but we'll have to see what develops in the next year or two.
Brilliant. Well, on that note of hope, I guess we are over time, and on behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank you all the remaining 3 panelists for your time, and of course thank you to the rest of the participants who've put in question, who've created a sense of discussion. I hope that the whole panel discussion and the session has been useful to a lot of the we can see a lot of veteran Mekong observers as well as sort of the general public. This is a very big topic, obviously, and an ongoing topic. It is very, there's a lot of twists and turns. There's this geopolitical angle. There's also sort of the environmental angle and others. So, it is a worthwhile topic to kind of sink your teeth into and explore different ways and different angles about it. So on that note, thank you again, and I think that we can end it here. If you have any further question, I guess you can reach out to the organization for more information later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.